So, tourists from Calgary is saying they want to see a rapid resolution on a new arena. Yesterday, King said that time is of the essence, they're behind the clock. What are your thoughts on timing?
I guess that's not very helpful for broadcast purposes. I see no need to rush on this. I think the idea is do it right. And if it takes time to do it right, it takes time. If the parties want to move very, very quickly, then really CSEC needs to come with something that they think might be palatable for the city. Simple as that.
On that note, Ken said on the radio earlier today that there's no, I forget how he phrased it. I guess, is there, the CalgaryNEXT proposal, there was $200 million from the city. He said in this case, people are going to be happy there's not public money, there's not an ask for that. Do you have any perspective on the appetite for public money?
Did he really say that?
I'm really fascinated by the first part of what you said, so I won't comment on it until I've heard it, because interesting. I think that if there was a project that went through with really, honestly, no public money, that'd be easy. 15-0, done tomorrow. If the math actually works on that. Remember that the $200 million in the CalgaryNEXT proposal was actually to build a field house. So to take that and put it into an arena and not build the field house, even if that money existed, which it doesn't, because of course the field house is unfunded at this point, I don't think that would go either. So lots of interesting conversations to be had.
The province today, we heard Brad Stevens say yesterday the province put somebody in charge of the West Village and the creosote. Today they've come out with their news release, 5 years, 1.3 million, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know what we're talking about.
Let's show it to you.
Let's just pause.
Pause for a sec.
All right.
Creosote
I love this. Is my
monitoring
favorite
plan.
part. Okay, yes, I do know about this. I heard about this yesterday. Yes. Same thing. In West Hillhurst. Yes. I can talk about
Okay, excellent. Hang on a second. All right, so your thoughts on the fact that the province is doing this?
Nothing has changed. I think that's what's important for people to know. They are being responsible about this because I think for a long time we had folks, I wouldn't say not doing any work, because certainly there's been a lot of work done to contain the creosote on that site. But I think we've had successive governments, municipal and at the provincial level, kind of think that the containment was enough, the monitoring was enough. And I think what we're really seeing both from the city and from the province is, we actually can't just contain it. We really have to move towards cleaning it up. And in one way, the CalgaryNEXT conversation was very helpful because it was the first time in a long time we did really detailed environmental assessment on what the plume looks like and where it is.
Does this now lead to action, maybe leading to going after the polluter in the courts?
I should hope so. We've had some really good, I shouldn't say in the courts, but we've had some really good conversations with the province about the polluter pay principle and about their willingness to assist in helping the polluter participate in this. And so I'm really, really keen on continuing those conversations.
Given that the CalgaryNEXT project is really in a very deep sleep, it's not dead. Maybe it's academic. But what's
It's
the city's-
academic, apparently.
What's
yes.
the city's time frame in terms of dealing with the creosote problem for whatever happens there?
Well,
in the future?
one of the reasons that the CalgaryNEXT proposal is in such a deep sleep, if you recall, is that the simple magnitude of the cleanup was so long in terms of time. It's like an old math problem. How many dump trucks nose to tail does it take, working how many hours a day to actually clean it up? And the answer was many, many years worth of dump trucks. But regardless, you got to get started. And so I think the real argument is, how long are we willing to wait to determine what the right funding sources are before we start lining up the dump trucks?
How important is the polluter pay principle to actually getting the work started?
I think it's really important. I don't want to set a dangerous precedent of polluters being able to get away without paying, but at the same time, I don't want to be tied up in court for decades before actually doing something. So I think that there are enough smart policy people and smart lawyers who can figure out how you square that circle and how you move forward.
And I realize you just said that work will take years, even if you get started before the polluter pay decision is made. Okay, so the city cleans it up and it takes 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, whatever. what do you do with the land?
I mean, once the cleanup is done?
Yeah.
Well, the good news, if it is good news, about the cleanup taking that long is it allows for the market to absorb a lot of the development potential that's there now, particularly in the East Village and the Rivers District. One of the big challenges with doing it all at once was that you wouldn't be able to complete the Rivers District if you had this other big swath of land in downtown Calgary competing with it. And that's why the CRLs wouldn't balance, the community revitalization levies wouldn't work. So if you proceed with the cleanup, then you actually will probably be in a more interesting development environment than you would have been if you somehow were able to develop today without doing all the cleanup.
Do you need a project for that site before the cleanup can occur?
No, not at all.
This money's for the West Hillhurst side, is it not?
Yeah, it's the other side of the Bow River. And so one of the enduring mysteries of this creosote is that for many, many years, the city and the province have felt that it is contained. There's a containment wall, there's pumps and so on site south of the Bow River. But we've had people in West Hillhurst very concerned that the creosote is migrating underneath the Bow River into their neighborhood, and this will help us determine whether that's happening or not. So over the last 7 years since I've been in this job, there has been a number of things that feel really arcane, that sometimes feel a little eye-glazing, about making changes internally to how the city delivers its services, and also making changes on how the city relates to the province. So the city charter stuff sometimes gets a little insomnia-inducing, and the stuff around the management of the city the same way, but this is actually really important stuff. This is a tremendously complicated organization. Nearly 20,000 colleagues I've got here in the city, and they drive buses and they collect the waste and recycling, and they look after the water supply, and they clean the streets, and they teach kids how to swim, and they're first on the streets, they're first on the scene in emergencies, and they look after our green spaces, and then they do all the support work that is required to get all the frontline workers to work every day and doing their work every day. And so as a result, it's an unbelievably complex organization. So you think about the CEO of Synovus. They got to know how to get oil sands and turn them into energy. You think of the CEO of the City of Calgary, and he's got to know how to run a fire department, a police department, a parks department, a cemetery department, a water utility, and a waste utility. So it is complicated. And one of the things that happens in organizations like this is because you have so many different things you do, you create huge silos. And so if you have the water department working on drainage in an area and thinking about how to improve drainage, but they're doing it not in accordance with the parks department, or the recreation department, or the planning department, you can end up with a lot of strange things going on. So, a really simple example of that is the incredibly irritating thing that happens when you tear up a road to fix something, and then shortly thereafter you have to tear up the road again to fix something else, and that irritates everybody. And so the idea here is to really think about all the different models of how we can deliver services better to people. And so what that means to people living in the city is you don't have roads torn up twice. It means that your neighborhood functions better in terms of all the things that are in your neighborhood that you use every day, and the city is better focused on your life in the neighborhood. And it also means that you better understand the costs of delivering your services. Because we can actually say to you, keeping your neighborhood clean costs this much to you per month or per year. And so this stuff is really arcane, but it has an incredible influence on the working lives of the 20,000 colleagues that work here, and ultimately leads to better services at no additional cost or even lower cost to citizens.
So
That was a really short answer.
at the end of the day, you anticipate that this could lead to greater efficiency in how the city delivers all the services.
Yeah, and ultimately better services. That's why we do it. I'll back up so you have some audio.
Okay.
So what we are trying to communicate today is that as a result of Council's decisions over time, which Council went into eyes wide open, we now have a $170 million gap for 2018. But before you panic, the $170 million means going to zero on a tax rate increase for 2018, as well as filling all of the one-time monies that we've used in various different buckets over the course of the last couple of years. So the 170 really would get us to a very positive place in terms of our overall budget balance. So the city will not run a budget deficit. Unlike other governments, we don't run budget deficits when our revenues go down. So council is going to have a number of tools at its disposal to fill that 170 million. So of course, those tools fall into, excuse me, as always, the tools fall into three categories. You raise revenue, you cut spending, or you dip into savings. And so council will have to look at the balance between those three things. Do they want to recommend a small tax increase in addition to a number of cost savings measures? Do they want to dip into our still pretty healthy savings more to get us through the economic downturn? And those are the things that council is going to have to really balance amongst. I suspect that the most rational thing to do will be to rely pretty heavily on more budget savings. Remember, we already have 325 million in savings that we found, but there's probably a couple other places we can look, particularly around workforce issues. But the really hard part will be at the end, which is will council say a small tax increase, even less than inflation, is what we want to do to fill the deficit, or do we want to make a statement and say zero, even if that means, cutting people's transit hours or something like that?
What sort of cost-saving measures could there be? I mean, we've already seen dump hours, for example, have been changed, and then you hear people complaining, dump's not open when I want to go. Like, in terms of the public, what changes would they see?
We have been trying really, really hard. Since I've been mayor, we actually have not invested in a lot of increases in services other than in transit and in operating things that we have built, and in a little bit on the low income side, which I think was very important. But we have really tried to shield customer-facing services from people. But you'll recall when we went to a slower schedule on street sweeping, well, people didn't like that at all, and we had to reverse that. When we reduced the level of maintenance in parks and mowed a little less often, people didn't like that. And so we have really tried to make cuts to customer-facing services very, very small, very much on the margins. But we can't do that forever, and you've heard me say that for a long time, is that it's not like there is so much waste in this building that we can just continue to cut and not impact people's services. And at some point, council has to make a decision on what are they willing to do.
What do you make of that divide we saw in the poll about people who are willing to see their taxes go up to get better services versus people who want to?
Yeah, it's about half and half now. Traditionally, we've seen something more like 60-40. 60% saying increase my taxes, 40% saying cut my services. So now it's getting a bit closer to one another, which is to be expected given the economic downturn. My argument, however, is that many of those services are actually the services that are most needed at this time. And I've often said that the number one role of government is don't make it worse. And so if, for example, you're going to make it harder for people to be able to get to school and work without needing a car by cutting transit, then that's ultimately self-defeating if you're looking at economic recovery.
One of those numbers we saw broken down on the 170 million is the Green Line debt servicing. There's actually that number on it now, 24 million. Is that a number that obviously would change over the next 30 years depending on interest rates?
The way that number is calculated is that is looking only at the city portion, and that basically is what will be required on an annual basis for 30 years. So it's a lot of money if you wanted to make sure that the city's 52 million was all for capital and none of it was for interest. So when we put the 50 million aside, the 52 million aside for 30 years, we were expecting that, and we knew, we've always known this, by the way. Some members of council, or I shouldn't say some members of council, in the media when this came out a few weeks ago, it was like, oh, was council surprised? No, we've always known this. We know how to do math. So 52 million times 30 years is obviously somewhere north of 1.5 billion. And we've always known that a portion of that would be to pay for interest. As council makes design choices on the Green Line that tend to be expensive, we're trying to see if there's a different way of paying for the interest so that that full 1.5 billion can be used to build the Green Line. And to get to a net present value of 1.5 billion in today's dollars, that means about 24 million a year in interest.
And total coincidence that the tax room that was taken.
An irritating coincidence, actually, because I've spent a fair bit of my time trying to explain those two things have nothing to do with one another. But it is roughly the same number.